had a drummer. In the American Army, each company had a drummer and a fifer. So times 10, the regiment would have about 20 fifers and drummers. In the British Army, they tended to have 2 drummers per company, and only the Grenadier Company was allowed to have fifers officially. But unofficially, they supplemented the captains of the companies wanted fifers, so they would have some fifers. The uniforms that we wear are British regimental uniforms issued by the Crown. And the difference, though, is if you look at the drummers, only one drummer or fifer has a red coat. And that is our drummer from the 23rd Regiment. He has a bearskin cap. Bearskin cap were worn by the elite, the grenadiers, and it was an elite thing to be a grenadier, and they were also recognized for the drummers as well, whereas the rest of the companies wore battalion hats like mine. But he wears a red coat because he is in a royal regiment, and the royal regiments kept the same color. In fact, if you look behind you, we have soldiers from his regiment. Just coincidentally, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers are behind us, and you can see the red coat and their bearskin caps and so on. But you'll notice the colorful array of the other drummers. The 22nd Regiment, my regiment, wears a buff coat faced in red, and notice the small clothes, the waistcoat and the breeches are also reversed. They're red. So typically in the British and American armies, they distinguished the drummers and fifers in some way from the rest of the soldiers. And one of the easiest ways was to reverse the colors. So notice that they're wearing buff coats with red. Our regiment would wear red coats with buff. Likewise, our drummer from the 54th Regiment has this beautiful, very, very obscure colored coat of green. What is the name of that color, Kelly?
It's
Popinjay green. His regiment wears a red coat with that color as the facing, but he wears the reverse. So you could find your drummers and fifers very, very easily in American and British armies. Other people that fought during the American Revolution with the French and the German troops, the troops from Germany, the Hessians and the Brunswickers, they also distinguished the drummers and fifers' coats in a different way, but the same theme. And the reason for that is if you have 500 men in your regiment and 20 men wearing a different coat, you could find them, and they're your communications people. So we just played drummer's call. The next thing that we would probably play would be the troop. And the reason for the troop was played usually at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the purpose of a troop was to assemble the men, inspect them, and call the rolls, make sure all the men were present and fit for duty. So this is the troop. Trooper assembly. Attention. Assembly. Now that is just one of several troops that the drummers and fifers might learn, but the same purpose. The purpose of a troop was to assemble the men and so on. So now the men are assembled. There'll be various things that the drummer might do during the day. The men were inspected and so on. Sometimes they would send for the colors. The colors are what we call today flags, and they were the most important sacred part of a regiment. They would generally always be under guard. They would be posted at the colonel's headquarters, and they would be escorted to the troops. So that would be one ceremony that a different troop would be played to, and so on. Excuse me a second. and load. So one thing on the battlefield, drummers were also used. Most drummers were actually not in battle or not fighting. They would be assigned to help the wounded. But an orderly drummer would be posted with the officer to relay commands. So I'm going to have an orderly drummer beat the preparative, which is for prime and load. Make ready and fire. Slightly different. Okay. Very simple drum beating. That was for the men to basically load their weapons and prepare to fire and engage the enemy. Other drum signals would be the advance. They would play the Grenadiers March to advance, and then of course the retreat. And the retreat had two meanings. One would be on the battlefield. They would signal for them to withdraw in an orderly fashion, and the other was a camp duty. They would play at the end of the day the same tune, but in the camp it would signal that you're off duty, and that would be played at sunset. You know the retreat, some of us? You know the retreat? We'll play the retreat. So we're going to play the retreat for you. Want to do the 3 times? So on the battlefield, that would be a signal for the men's motion to withdraw. But in camp or in a garrison, in a fort, that would be the signal at sunset that the men were off duty. At the same time, they would post the sentries and the guards, but the rest of the men would go take care of cleaning their weapons, doing their own household chores, whatever they needed to do, prepare their suppers and so on. At the very end of a typical day, at around 8 o'clock in the winter and 10 o'clock in the summer, they would play the tap 2. And the tap 2 was another signal for the camp to signal lights out, go to bed. We don't want to see you until the morning. And the name comes from, we believe, the Dutch Doden Tap 2. And the idea being that the sutlers who were selling liquor to the soldiers would turn the taps to, basically close the taps and not dispense any more liquor. So the tap 2, and we still have it today. We call it taps or tattoo. It basically is today it's become a very a military ceremony, but that's where its origins were. We're going to play some other tunes today. The other thing that drummers did was play for the march, so keep the men in step. So we're going to play a number of marches. Almost every one that we'll play were played by both the British and the Americans. They may change the name. British Grenadiers, the Americans didn't call it that. Well, yes, actually they did, but they also called it the Liberty Song. Same tune, but different words. But we're going to start with a different tune that I'm sure you're familiar with. Recognize that one. Probably the most famous tune that came out of the American Revolution, but it was played by the British originally to taunt and poke fun at the Americans, that they're just Yankees. and doodles. And then after the Americans started scoring some victories, they played it right back at the British. And again, different lyrics were composed to these marches. The next tune is one that is just a great marching song, Moon and Seven Stars. Another tune that is in a lot of American manuscripts is called Welcome Here Again. Wait a moment till we get half the back. Welcome Here Again. Welcome Here Again. Okay, we're going to attempt British Grenadiers. It's interesting because this has probably happened in the 18th century as well. We have two different versions or three different versions that we know. So we're trying to learn each other's version today. And that wasn't uncommon. In the 18th century, most music was learned by ear. Most people didn't, most of the fifers and drummers didn't read music. The fife majors probably did. So there are many different versions from the 18th century that are equally authentic. But we're going to play one version that is actually from a British, book of British marches, and it's called British Grenadiers, or Quick March number 10. I mentioned earlier that the Americans liked that tune so much. In the early 1770s, they took the same melody and made their own words to it called Liberty Song. And the British called it the British Grenadiers, who were the elite company of the British Army. And they had words that praised the British Grenadiers. We're going to play Rakes of Mallow. This is an Irish song. The British took music from all the different areas. So in the British repertoire, music had its origins in Germany, in England, Scotland, Ireland. There are French tunes they played. They didn't mind where they got the music. They just took good music and incorporated it as their own. Anyway, this is called the Rakes of Marlow. It is a bit of a bawdy song. A rake was somebody who was kind of, how should I say, took liberties, I guess, and were like to drink and dance, and the men like to associate with women and so on, so they were called rakes. So the Rakes of Marlow. Some time if there are any questions. Anybody have any questions about the role of music, or
what did they get paid versus the soldiers?
Great question. So you notice most of the musicians are youth. During the Revolutionary War, it actually turns out most of the British drummers and fifers were adults, but they may have been in the army for 10 years. So they may be 25 years old, but they started when they were 13 or 14. It was a career in the British Army. In the American Army, we tend to have more teenagers, but the American Army was brand new, you know, and so on. But even if you're a teenager, or even as young as a 12-year-old, you would get paid as a corporal instead of a private soldier. Now, I don't know exactly what the British pay was, but the American Army, I do know, a private soldier got paid $6 and 1/3. And I'm sorry, 2/3, and a drummer got $7 and 1/3. Not a huge amount more, but they did get paid because they had a skill. And likewise, when a 16-year-old drummer or fifer, let's say, became 18 or 20, they didn't necessarily give him a musket because they had a skill. So they valued the skill of playing the drum or the fife.